At my granddaughter's birthday party, my own daughter told me I ruined her perfect aesthetic. She said it loud enough for everyone to hear. Even the neighbors turned their heads. I didn't argue. I just smiled. 2 weeks later, I bought the dream house she always wanted, in cash. When I sent her the photo, she cried. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The night my world collapsed smelled of smoke and sorrow. My house was gone, swallowed whole by a fire that left nothing but ashes and a silence too heavy to carry. By morning, I stood on the porch of my daughter's immaculate home with a suitcase in one hand and an urn in the other. The ashes still clung to my clothes, stubborn as regret. I had nowhere else to go, nowhere but here to the woman I had given everything to raise. Rachel opened the door, bathed in the soft glow of the porch light, her silk blouse tucked neatly under a white cardigan, not a strand of hair out of place. Behind her, the house gleamed like something out of a catalog. Stone facade, black door, potted plants arranged in perfect symmetry. She didn't look at the soot on my coat or the worn handle of my suitcase. She didn't flinch at the scent of fire that still wrapped around me. Her eyes scanned me like I was an unsightly rug clashing with her beige furniture. Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed. You can't stay here, Mom. You ruined the aesthetic. The words cut sharper than any blade. I can't even remember what I said next. Maybe I nodded, maybe I whispered something useless. But I remember the sound of the door closing, soft, final, like a cruel punctuation mark at the end of a life I had poured into her. That sound followed me through the night like a ghost. I ended up at the Oakview Inn, a sagging roadside motel that smelled of wet carpet and mildew. $28 bought me a bed that groaned under my weight, a flickering lamp, and a mirror cracked so deeply it refused to reflect me properly. Perhaps that was a mercy. I sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in my lap. My thumb hovered over the keypad, but there was no one to call. My family was gone. Friends had drifted away with time. I had raised Rachel alone after Thomas left when she was 10, working days at the diner and nights sewing for a tailor, stitching dreams into hems and seams just to pay the mortgage. I never remarried. I never brought another man into our lives. I was too busy making sure my daughter never felt abandoned again. Rachel had been my pride. She'd earned on straight A's, gone to college on a scholarship, carved out a career as a nutritionist. She married a successful plastic surgeon and moved into a life of marble countertops and manicured lawns. I had watched from the sidelines, proud yet uneasy, as every new step seemed to carry her farther away from me. Still, I never imagined she would turn me away when I had nowhere else to go. That night in the motel, I cried quietly into the thin pillow so no one in the next room would hear. I'm not the kind of woman who cries easily, not when I lost my job, not when I buried my only sister without another family member at my side. But that night, tears came until my throat ached, until the realization set in like frost. I had become inconvenient, an eyesore, a smudge on the canvas of her carefully curated life. By morning, my eyes were raw, but my feet carried me somewhere familiar. I walked aimlessly through streets until I found myself in Oakwood Terrace, the neighborhood where I had raised Rachel. The little clapboard house still stood, though weathered, its chain-link fence leaning and the backyard long overtaken by weeds. That yard had once been full of dandelions Rachel used to blow into the wind, each wish rising like tiny parachutes. On a porch across the street sat Lorraine Brooks, an old friend I hadn't seen in years, shelling peas into a bowl like time had never touched her. She squinted, then let out a laugh that startled the birds from the power lines. "Helen Carter," she hollered, hopping from her rocker. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I told her bits and pieces, enough to admit I was staying at the Oakview, that I was tired, that I needed some air. Lorraine's sharp eyes saw right through me. "You're not figuring things out, sugar," she said, sliding the bowl aside. "You're just trying not to fall apart." We sat for hours, the years between us dissolving. We talked about our daughters, about marriages that hadn't lasted, about how time runs like wild horses you can't quite catch. And then, like always, she cut straight through the noise with one line. "You still got fight in you, Helen. You just forgot how to throw a punch." That night, back at the motel, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, her words echoing louder than the hum of the vending machine outside my door. I thought about all I had sacrificed for Rachel, The years of double shifts, the choices I never got to make, the dreams I buried so hers could bloom. And now I wasn't even good enough to sit on her perfect couch. At 3 in the morning, I reached for the little black notebook I'd kept tucked in my purse for decades. Every penny I had ever saved was scribbled inside. Tips from the diner, spare sewing money, small investments, bonds no one knew about. My fingers traced the numbers as if touching proof that my life hadn't been completely erased. When I added it all up, I had just enough. Not enough for revenge, but enough for something far more powerful. Something that would remind my daughter of who I truly was. And that was the night I decided I wasn't done yet. The morning after that sleepless night, I wandered with no clear destination. My feet seemed to know where they wanted to go, even if my mind didn't. Hours later, I found myself standing at the edge of Oakwood Terrace, the neighborhood where Rachel had grown up. It was worn now, its paint faded, its porches sagging under the weight of time. But the place still carried echoes of laughter, summer heat, and the kind of love that made the struggles bearable. The house where Rachel took her first steps still stood, though weather-beaten. The fence leaned as if exhausted. The garden, once full of dandelions, had surrendered to weeds. Yet the tree in the front yard had grown taller, its branches stretching high, as if refusing to forget the little girl who once climbed it barefoot. Across the street, a figure sat on a wide porch shelling peas into a dented bowl. Lorraine Brooks looked up, squinted, and then broke into a laugh that rang through the air like an old church bell. "Well, if it isn't Helen Carter," she said, pushing herself up from her chair with surprising ease. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Her voice, familiar and steady, loosened something inside me. I managed a small smile as she wrapped me in a hug that smelled of flower and summer rain. I didn't tell her everything. I couldn't. But I admitted enough that I was staying at the Oakview Inn, that I needed air, that I didn't know what was next. Lorraine wasn't fooled. Her eyes had always been sharp, the kind that cut through pretense like glass. "You're not figuring things out, sugar," she said firmly, setting the bowl aside. "You're just trying not to fall apart." We sat together on her porch, rocking gently as the afternoon light shifted. We spoke of old times, of daughters who had grown and gone, of marriages that had cracked and healed unevenly. Time had carried so much away from us, yet here we were, still breathing, still stubborn. After a long pause, Lorraine leaned toward me, her voice soft but unyielding. "You still got fight in you, Helen. You just forgot how to throw a punch." Her words sank into me like a seed buried deep in soil. That night, as I returned to the motel, they echoed louder than the buzz of the neon sign outside my window. I sat on the bed, opened the small black notebook I had guarded for years, and began flipping through the pages. Every line was filled with numbers, tiny entries written in my cramped hand. Diner tips saved instead of spent. Money from hemming skirts and sewing buttons late into the night. Small investments, bonds tucked away, interest collected quietly. My life had been measured not in years, but in pennies, stitched together with grit and sacrifice. I totaled the figures again and again, making sure the math was real. The amount wasn't enormous, but it was enough. Enough to do something bold. Enough to remind Rachel who I was. The decision crystallized in that cramped motel room with its peeling wallpaper and humming air conditioner. I would not shrink into the shadows of my daughter's perfect life. I would not let her final word be that I ruined her aesthetic. If aesthetics were all she valued, then I would show her one worth remembering. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of a grand house framed by white columns and a wraparound porch. Its lawn stretched green and manicured, the marsh visible just beyond. It looked like it had been pulled straight from the glossy magazine pages Rachel used to pore over as a teenager. I remembered the day she circled a photo of a house just like this, her eyes alight with certainty. "One day, I'm going to live there," she had said. Now I had bought it in cash. The paint gleamed fresh and white. A red "for sale" sign leaned against the grass, no longer needed. My heart pounded as I snapped a picture with my phone, the house standing proud and perfect in the frame. Without adding a single word, I sent the image to Rachel. It took less than 5 minutes for the phone to ring. "Mom?" Her voice was tight, sharp with something between fear and disbelief. "Why did you send me a picture of that house?" I pressed the phone to my ear, savoring the silence before I answered. Because I bought it. She didn't speak at first. I could almost hear her inhale, her breath catching as if the air itself had turned against her. It's yours, I added softly. Or it could be, but I'm thinking of selling it. Her voice cracked when she finally managed to reply. Why? Why would you do that? Because, sweetheart, I said with a calmness I hadn't felt in years, it fits your aesthetic. Before she could answer, I ended the call. For the first time in a long while, I smiled. What I didn't know then was that this choice wasn't just about a house. It wasn't only about reclaiming dignity or proving I wasn't finished. This was the opening move in a story much larger than I could imagine. One that would test the fragile ties between us, unearth the secrets buried for decades, and force both of us to face truths we had long denied. The house was more than wood and paint. It was a mirror, and soon it would reflect everything we had been running from. There are moments in life when silence feels heavier than thunder. That's how it was the morning Rachel's car pulled into the gravel driveway of the house I had bought, the house she once dreamed of, the house I now owned. I was sitting in the sunroom sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup when I heard the tires crunch and the engine cut. I didn't move. I simply waited. The front door opened with a hesitant creak. I had mailed her a key 2 days earlier, wrapped in a velvet pouch. Her heels struck the hardwood like gunshots, each step sharp and unsteady. Mama? Her voice was soft, almost fragile. I let the silence hang until she found me. She looked different, less polished, less perfect. Her eyes were swollen from lack of sleep. Her hair frizzed at the edges, her blouse wrinkled in a way that suggested she had forgotten how to care about appearances. You really bought this? She asked, her gaze darting around the sunroom, as if the walls might vanish if she blinked too hard. I nodded once. Wow. I leaned back in the wicker chair, the morning light slicing across the floor between us. Because you said I ruined your aesthetic. I figured I'd find one that suited you better. For a fleeting moment, her face crumpled. The armor slipped, but in an instant, she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. This isn't funny, Mom. I'm not laughing. Her eyes flashed with something raw, anger, fear, I couldn't tell. You sent me a picture of a house you knew I would love, and then you put a for sale sign in front of it. What is this supposed to be? Some kind of game? No, I said evenly. It's not a game. It's a mirror. She blinked, confusion clouding her expression. You think I'm cruel? She asked. You think I don't care? My world, it's curated, structured. Everything has a place, a standard. And you don't fit in that. You're unpredictable. You say things without thinking. You don't blend in. I held her gaze steady. I didn't raise you to blend in. I raised you to stand tall. Her eyes darted away, her composure breaking. For the first time in years, she looked young again, uncertain, vulnerable, almost afraid. Is that why you've been rewriting things? I asked quietly. Her head snapped back toward me. What are you talking about? You told people your father left and never looked back. I paused, my voice low and deliberate. But that's not the truth, is it? The silence stretched, taut as wire. Rachel's lips parted, but no words came. I stood, walked to a drawer, and pulled out an envelope. It was worn at the edges, the paper yellowed with time. I placed it in her trembling hands. Her fingers unfolded it with care, and when she saw the handwriting, her eyes widened. It was from Thomas, dated years after he had walked out. In the letter, he begged forgiveness, spoke of God and redemption, and promised he had changed. He wrote that he had tried to see us, that he had stood at our door twice, turned away before he could even explain. Rachel's lips moved silently as she read, and then her knees buckled. She sank onto the couch, clutching the letter like it might burn her. I told him to leave, she whispered, more to herself than to me. He called. I answered. He said he wanted to see us. I told him we didn't need him. I was 16. I thought I was protecting you. My chest tightened, fury and sorrow colliding inside me. You worked so hard, she continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. He left you with everything. I wanted to punish him. I thought it was better if he stayed gone, so I erased him. Tears streamed down her face, breaking through years of polish and pretense. I never told you. I didn't think you would forgive me. I sat beside her, my hand hovering before finally resting on hers. She flinched at first, but didn't pull away. There's more than one way to ruin a home, Rachel, I said softly. Sometimes it's not fire. Sometimes it's silence. The weight of the years pressed down on us both. The walls of the house seemed to hum with the ghosts of choices made too soon and truths buried too deep. I don't deserve this house, she whispered. That's not for me to decide. Her eyes lifted to mine, red and swollen. What if I wanted to earn it? I didn't answer. Instead, I looked out the window at the wildflowers pushing stubbornly through cracks in the garden path. Then we'd have to start again, I finally said. Her voice trembled, but her eyes held steady. I don't want easy. I want you back. Something in me softened, but not all the way. I remembered too clearly the cold porch light, the silk blouse, the door closing in my face. Then don't say it, I whispered. Show it. Rachel nodded slowly, and in that moment the first brick of the wall between us cracked. But the house held more than echoes of reconciliation. Hidden in the box I had rescued from the fire was one more envelope, brittle with age, sealed with yellowed tape. I hadn't noticed it before. Now it waited like a sleeping secret. And when I opened it, everything I thought I knew would unravel. Stay with me, because the past isn't finished, and neither are we. The envelope had been buried at the bottom of the box, sealed tight with brittle tape that cracked when I peeled it open. My hands trembled as though they already knew what waited inside. When I unfolded the letter, my heart stopped. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, hurried, slanted in the way Thomas always wrote, as if he were already halfway out the door, even when he sat still. The letter wasn't decades old, it was dated just 4 years earlier. Helen, if this finds you, it means I finally found the courage to try again. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I was a coward. I let my fear eat me alive. But leaving you was the greatest mistake of my life. I came back twice, but Rachel wouldn't let me through the door. She told me you had moved on, that you didn't need me anymore. Still, I never stopped loving you, never stopped hoping for one more chance. I pressed the paper against my chest, rocking gently in the chair, as grief and fury tangled inside me. Rachel had done more than erase her father from the story. She had stolen the chance for me to decide for myself. When I reached the last lines, I could barely see through the blur of tears. If I don't see you in this life, know that you were always my lighthouse. I knew then that I had to find him. Not for romance, not even for reconciliation, but for truth, for closure, for the right to face the man who had broken me and decide, once and for all, if there was anything left worth salvaging. Lorraine noticed the change in me before anyone else did. She leaned over her porch railing one evening, cigarette dangling from her fingers. "You've got that old fire in your eyes again," she said. "Where you headed?" "Tennessee," I replied, folding laundry on her porch swing. Her brows lifted. "That where the bones are buried." "Not the bones," I said softly, "but maybe the part of me I left behind." 3 days later, I packed the car and drove west. The road stretched wide and empty, carrying me through towns with names I couldn't pronounce, past diners where the coffee was so strong it could wake the dead. With each mile, memories rose unbidden. Our wedding day, his laughter echoing in the tiny kitchen, the night he left, and the hollow silence that followed. By the time I reached the address from the letter, the sky had slipped into dusk. The little one-story house had faded blue shutters and a for rent sign staked in the yard. My stomach sank. Still I knocked. A thin woman in her 40s answered, confusion flickering across her face when I asked for Thomas Carter. "He passed away last spring," she said gently. "Pancreatic cancer. It was fast, didn't even make it 3 months after diagnosis." The ground seemed to vanish beneath me. My voice barely broke through the lump in my throat. He died?" She nodded, then studied me more closely. "Are you Helen?" I could only whisper, "Yes." Her expression softened into something kind. "He talked about you all the time, said you were the one who got away. He left something for you." She led me inside. The house smelled faintly of lemon oil and old books. On a shelf sat a wooden box carved with tiny birds. Inside were photographs of me and Rachel from years ago, a pressed flower from our wedding, and another letter. Helen, you were my lighthouse, even when I drifted. I hope you found happiness. I hope you knew deep down that I never stopped loving you. And if there's still a chance, wherever I am, I'll be waiting. I don't remember the drive back to Charleston. The world blurred into a ribbon of asphalt, the horizon smeared with dawn by the time I reached the city limits. What I carried in my coat pocket wasn't just paper. It was a life unfinished, a love half-lived, and a wound I hadn't realized was still open. When I pulled into the driveway of the house, Rachel's car was already there. She was sitting on the porch steps with her knees pulled tight to her chest, makeup streaked down her face. When I stepped out, she rose to her feet but didn't speak. I walked toward her slowly, the letter heavy in my pocket. I know, she whispered before I could say a word. I know about the letter. I know you know. When I searched her face, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, I saw not the woman with perfect clothes and sharp edges, but the girl who used to curl against me during thunderstorms. I thought I was protecting you, she said, her voice trembling. I thought he didn't deserve you. I thought you'd be better without him. But I was wrong. The porch light buzzed faintly above us, moths circling endlessly. My throat ached as I finally spoke. I forgave him. Rachel choked back a sob. Can you forgive me? I didn't answer. Not yet. Forgiveness wasn't a lightning strike. It was a slow rain, and she needed to stand in it a while. Still, as we sat together in the silence, I realized the story wasn't finished. Redemption isn't something handed down. It has to be built, brick by brick, choice by choice. And I had an idea where to begin. Sometimes the most fragile things don't shatter with noise. They crack slowly, almost silently, until one day the break is undeniable. That's how it felt sitting beside Rachel on the porch steps, the weight of her confession between us like a storm that refused to pass. The house loomed behind us, proud and waiting. I had bought it with money scraped together over decades, but it had already begun to transform into something far larger than bricks and beams. The question was whether Rachel and I could transform with it. In the days that followed, she came back. Not polished, not perfect, but raw. Eyes red from crying, sleeves rolled up. She didn't make promises. She didn't say the words again. She simply started showing up. It began with paint. She stood in the living room with her hair tied back, a roller in her hand. If I'm going to earn this, I need to work for it, she said. Her designer nails chipped by the end of the day, and she didn't even notice. I watched her from the doorway, a cautious hope stirring in me. The chandelier that had once thrown sharp prisms of light came down, replaced with softer bulbs that made the room glow warm instead of cold. The curtains disappeared, letting the sunlight spill unfiltered across the floor. The house, once a shrine to appearances, began to breathe. Lorraine stopped by one afternoon with lemonade and her unflinching honesty. She took one look at Rachel on her knees, scrubbing the baseboards, and let out a laugh. Well, I'll be damned, she said, setting the pitcher down. Didn't think I'd see the day. Rachel flushed but didn't stop. I don't want easy, she muttered. I want real. It wasn't only about the house, it was about the walls between us, the fortress she had built with silence and distance. Each brushstroke, each chipped nail, each bead of sweat was a small surrender, a way of saying, I'm trying. Word began to spread through the neighborhood. Old friends drifted in, bringing casseroles, paint supplies, and memories. They didn't come because of Rachel's polished reputation. They came because they saw the house shifting into something that mattered, something that welcomed instead of excluded. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Rachel and I sat on the porch swing she had painted teal. She rested her elbows on her knees, staring at the horizon. I want this place to mean more than just a second chance for me, she said quietly. I want it to be for women like you, women like us, the ones who get left behind. The idea hung between us, fragile and fierce. Rose Harbor, that was the name she suggested. A refuge for women who had been abandoned, forgotten, or deemed inconvenient. For a long moment, I said nothing. My throat felt tight, my heart unsteady. This was the daughter who once slammed a door in my face, who told me I ruined her aesthetic. And now she was offering to build something that could save not only us, but others too. I nodded, the smallest of gestures, but she understood. From then on, the work deepened. Rachel reached out to community leaders. She met with social workers. She researched nonprofits late into the night, her laptop glowing as the rest of the house slept. During the day, she hammered nails, painted walls, and hauled boxes of donated furniture. She stopped hiding behind polished imperfection. She let herself sweat, stumble, and even fail. It was not easy. There were nights when her temper flared, when exhaustion made her sharp, when the weight of guilt pressed so heavy that she could barely stand it. But she kept coming back, and slowly something shifted between us. She began to ask questions, not about logistics or appearances, but about me. Real questions. What did you dream of before you had me? Did you ever want to leave it all behind? Did I make you happy? The last one stole my breath. I looked her straight in the eyes and told her the truth. You were the best and hardest thing that ever happened to me. She didn't flinch. She simply nodded, her eyes glistening. The house became a living thing, pulsing with voices and laughter, with the scrape of brushes against walls and the scent of sawdust in the air. What had begun as my answer to rejection was becoming a sanctuary. Not just for me, not just for Rachel, for women who needed to know they weren't finished yet. But beneath the fresh paint and new purpose, shadows lingered. The envelope I had opened had only been the beginning. There were more letters in that box, truths still waiting to rise, secrets that could unravel everything Rachel and I had begun to stitch back together. And when the next secret came to light, it would test us harder than any slammed door or broken promise ever had. Stay close, because the past doesn't stay buried. It waits for the right moment to surface. And when it does, it changes everything. The journal arrived in a plain brown package 2 weeks after Rachel and I had settled into our uneasy truce. It was wrapped in twine, the leather worn and fraying at the edges. The moment I opened it, I knew whose it was. Thomas. His handwriting filled the pages, rushed and restless, the way he had always written, as if the words themselves were running from time. I didn't read it alone. Rachel sat cross-legged across from me on the floor of the sunroom, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. Together, we turned the pages. Thomas had poured his regrets into the journal, his failures, his attempts to come back, the letters he never mailed. He wrote about watching from the shadows at Rachel's high school graduation, too afraid to approach, too convinced he no longer deserved a place beside us. He wrote about the guilt that haunted him and the hope that refused to die. Rachel pressed her forehead to the open pages and wept. Not the sharp tears of anger I had seen before, but the kind that came from a wound carried too long. For the first time, she saw her father not as the villain she had painted him to be, but as a broken man who had loved us imperfectly yet fiercely. We buried the journal beneath the magnolia tree in the garden. No marker, no ceremony, just the two of us kneeling in the dirt, our hands covered in soil, our hearts heavy but strangely lighter at the same time. When we rose, I felt something shift. The past was no longer a chain. It was a lesson. From that day forward, the house began to take on a life of its own. Rose Harbor, Rachel's name for it, was no longer just a dream. It was becoming real. The first women arrived quietly, carrying bags heavier with sorrow than with belongings. Patricia, who had been pushed out of her son's house after breaking her hip, and Linda, a retired teacher who had lived in her car for nearly a year after her husband drained their savings and vanished. Their eyes carried the same look I had seen in the mirror at the motel, exhausted, invisible, almost erased. We welcomed them into freshly painted rooms, beds made with crisp sheets, a vase of wildflowers on each nightstand. Rachel insisted on writing notes by hand and leaving them on the pillows. You matter. You are safe. You are home. At first, the house was quiet. Patricia shuffled cautiously with her cane, eyes downcast. Linda whispered her thanks as if afraid to take up space. But within a week, the walls echoed with voices again. Patricia hummed while watering the flowers in the kitchen window. Linda offered to tutor a neighbor's child in reading. Life was returning, both to them and to us. Rachel threw herself into the work with a zeal I hadn't expected. She researched nonprofits, met with city officials, and drafted proposals by night while rolling paint onto walls by day. She even convinced Lorraine to choose the kitchen tiles. Gaudy blue and green squares that clashed terribly, but somehow made the room feel alive. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to me in years began to stop by, carrying casseroles, old furniture, and laughter that spilled onto the porch. They didn't come because of Rachel's reputation or her perfect image. They came because Rose Harbor was no longer just a house. It was becoming a promise. Rachel and I worked side by side, sometimes in silence, sometimes in conversation that dug deeper than I expected. She asked questions I had long ago given up hope of hearing. What did you want before you had me? Did you ever dream of traveling? Did you regret the choices you made? Her voice carried no judgment, only longing to know me beyond the role of mother. For the first time, I answered honestly. I wanted a porch full of laughter, music in the evenings, peace in my bones, and I wanted you. She blinked hard, nodded once, and kept painting. But her shoulders eased, and her movements softened. The day we officially opened Rose Harbor, the house looked transformed. Sunlight poured through the windows, touching every corner. Chairs mismatched but sturdy filled the dining room. The porch swing creaked as neighbors gathered for lemonade and peach cobbler. A small band of high schoolers played off-key jazz, and it was perfect. Rachel stood on the porch, her voice trembling as she addressed the crowd. My mother built me a life when she had nothing, and when I turned my back on her, she gave me something I didn't deserve. A second chance. Rose Harbor is for every woman who has been told she no longer belongs. This is their home now. This is our home. Applause rippled through the lawn. Some clapped politely, some with tears in their eyes. I sat in a folding chair, a napkin pressed to my cheeks, unable to stop the tears that slipped free. That night, when the crowd had gone and the lanterns flickered low on the porch, Rachel sat beside me with a glass of iced tea. She leaned her head on my shoulder the way she had as a child. You were right, she whispered. A house doesn't make a home. I pressed my lips together, swallowed the ache, and held her hand. For the first time in years, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was tender. But peace never lingers without shadows. And hidden in the folds of the past was one more letter, one more truth waiting to rise. It would not only test the fragile bridge we were building, it would decide if it could hold. Not all storms arrive with thunder. Some walk in softly, carrying laughter in one hand and heartbreak in the other. That was Sylvia. She came to Rose Harbor one bright morning, rolling up the walkway in a wheelchair with a single worn bag on her lap and a bottle of cheap perfume tucked in the side pocket. Her hair was silver, her eyes sharp as a saxophone's cry. She had been a jazz singer once, the kind who could hush a crowded room with a single note. 2 strokes had slowed her body, but not her spirit. I heard you take women like me, she said, voice husky, carrying the smoke of 100 nightclubs. I don't have much left, but I can still hum a tune. We took her in that very night. From the start, she became the heartbeat of Rose Harbor. She sang at breakfast, low and raspy, filling the kitchen with a kind of joy we hadn't realized was missing. She told stories of smoky clubs and lovers who played trumpet until dawn. The other women leaned toward her like moths to flame, soaking in her light. Rachel adored her. Every Thursday evening, she sat with Sylvia on the porch swing, brushing her hair as the older woman recited tales she had told a dozen times before. Rachel never interrupted, never rushed. She simply listened. And I watched my daughter transform under the weight of someone else's story, the sharp edges of her pride slowly smoothing into compassion. But joy is always threaded with shadow. One night I heard a thud in the hallway. I rushed out to find Sylvia collapsed on the floor, her breathing shallow, her lips tinged gray. Rachel froze, paralyzed with fear. I dropped to my knees, held Sylvia's trembling hand, and called for help. Her eyes fluttered open long enough to whisper, "Don't let me go in silence." She survived the night, barely. The doctor sent her home with an oxygen tank and a warning. She returned weaker, quieter, her voice reduced to a whisper. But still she hummed. Still she smiled. Rachel didn't leave her side. Sleepless nights left dark circles under her eyes, but she kept showing up. She confessed to me one dawn in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug she didn't drink from. When she fell, I thought it was you. I was so scared. I couldn't breathe. I realized then that Rachel's cruelty in the past hadn't come from indifference, but from fear. The fear that one day I would vanish and leave her with nothing but regret. That fear had made her cold. Now it was making her brave. On Sylvia's last morning, the air was soft with the promise of rain. She asked us for one thing: let me go out singing. We dressed her in a blue velvet robe that once belonged to a stage she had outlived, wrapped a blanket around her thin legs, and carried her to the porch swing. The sun crept over the horizon as she opened her mouth. Her voice trembled, fragile but pure, as she sang the opening lines of Misty. Each note stretched across the porch, across the marsh, across our hearts. Rachel held her hand the entire time, tears streaming silently. I sat beside them, unable to move, unwilling to miss a single breath. By the final note, her eyes closed, her chest stilled, and she was gone. We buried her ashes in the garden beneath the rose bush we had planted weeks earlier. Each woman laid a flower on the soil. Rachel read a poem she had written by hand, her voice breaking but steady enough to honor Sylvia's request. I wept openly, not only for Sylvia, but for all of us, for every woman who had ever been told she was too much or not enough, for every story that ended before the world was ready to let it go. That night, Rachel crawled into my bed like she had when she was 5 years old, shaking with tears she didn't try to hide. I held her against me until her breathing slowed, until exhaustion finally claimed her. The next morning, I found her sitting in the sunroom with a notebook open in her lap. Her hair was loose, her face bare of makeup. She looked younger somehow, softened by grief and shaped by it too. "I want to write about this place," she said quietly. "The stories, the women, everything." "Then start with your own," I told her. She looked at me, eyes uncertain. "You think anyone would care?" I leaned forward and kissed her forehead. "Rachel Carter, your story is the one that built this house, and it's the story that will carry it forward." For a moment, she simply stared, and then she nodded. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in lavender and rose, a boy appeared at the door. He couldn't have been more than 16, thin and nervous, clutching an envelope like it might bite him. "You Helen Carter?" he asked. I nodded. He pressed the envelope into my hand and bolted down the steps before I could ask a single question. The handwriting on the paper stopped my breath. Thomas's. Weaker now, shakier, but still his. My hands trembled as I held it, my heart pounding in my chest. Sylvia had left us with song, but Thomas had left me with words that might change everything all over again. And what waited inside that envelope was not the end of our story, it was the beginning of another storm. Stay close, because what I discovered in that letter would shake the very foundation of Rose Harbor and decide whether Rachel and I could truly build something that lasted. The letter lay heavy in my hand, the paper trembling as though it carried its own heartbeat. I opened it slowly, afraid that once I read the words inside, there would be no turning back. "Helen, if you're holding this, it means someone braver than I found a way to get it to you. I wish I could have said this in person, sitting beside you, holding your hand, but life rarely gives us the endings we imagine. I know what I did. I know the damage I caused. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know this. I see you. I see what you've built. You turned pain into purpose, rejection into refuge. And even if I couldn't stay, you made something beautiful out of what was broken. Always yours, Thomas." By the time I finished, my chest was heaving with sobs I hadn't allowed myself in years. They weren't the sharp, tearing cries of grief. These were softer, like rain after drought, a release I hadn't known I needed. That night, I sat with Rachel on the porch beneath the velvet sky. The moon was high, spilling silver light across the marsh. I placed the letter in her hands. She read it silently, her lips pressed together, her eyes glistening. When she finished, she leaned her head against my shoulder like she had done as a little girl. "I wish I had known him better," she whispered. "You still can," I said. "Through this, through us." The house behind us seemed to hum with life, voices drifting from the kitchen, laughter rising from the parlor, footsteps creaking on the old floorboards. Rose Harbor wasn't just surviving, it was awakening. In the weeks that followed, the mission grew faster than either of us expected. Word spread beyond Charleston. Donations arrived daily, boxes of linens, stacks of books, furniture with the kind of wear that spoke of years of family dinners and holiday gatherings. One man delivered 5 brand new mattresses, tears in his eyes as he said, "My mama died alone. I wish she'd had a place like this." Rachel stepped into her role as if she had been preparing her entire life without knowing it. She balanced meetings with city officials and fundraising calls with scrubbing grout in the bathrooms. She didn't delegate the work she didn't want. She did it all, every unglamorous, sweaty task. Her manicure chipped, her hair pulled back, her laughter more frequent now. For me, the transformation was quieter. I found myself telling stories again. On the porch, in the kitchen, late at night when new residents were too restless to sleep. I became the keeper of voices, reminding each woman who crossed our threshold that she was not invisible, that her scars did not erase her worth. One evening, as we hung mismatched curtains in the library, Rachel paused, a strip of fabric draped over her arm. "Do you think he knows?" she asked. "Do you think Dad sees what we're building?" I looked at her, at the daughter who had once turned me away and was now standing in the dust with her sleeves rolled up, fighting for strangers the way I once fought for her. "I think he does," I said, and I meant it. The women came in waves after that. Each one carried stories heavy enough to bend the spine. Patricia began teaching knitting to the younger volunteers. Linda took over the bookkeeping, her precise hands steadying the chaos of donations. New faces joined them, some tearful, some defiant, all of them hungry for a place to belong. Rachel's compassion deepened with every arrival. She asked questions she never would have dared years earlier. She listened without judgment. She stayed up late with residents who couldn't sleep, sitting cross-legged on their beds like a sister instead of a benefactor. I watched her carefully. She wasn't just apologizing anymore. She was changing. That, more than any letter or speech, was what began to heal me. Still, the past lingered like a shadow at the edge of every room. Thomas's words had given me peace, but they had also reignited old aches. He had believed in me even after decades apart. He had called me his lighthouse. And I couldn't help but wonder how different our lives might have been if Rachel had opened that door instead of closing it. But regrets no longer owned me. Not after all this. One quiet evening, Rachel found me in the garden, kneeling by the magnolia tree where we had buried Thomas's journal. She crouched beside me, dirt staining her knees, and slipped her hand into mine. "I can't change what I did," she said softly, "but I can build something that makes it right." Her voice was steady, stronger than I had ever heard it, and for the first time I believed her. Rose Harbor was no longer just a house we were fixing. It was a covenant, a promise written not in paint or stone, but in the lives it sheltered. It was Rachel's redemption, my resurrection, and Thomas's legacy, all woven together under one roof. As I looked up at the porch lights glowing against the night, I felt something settle inside me. Not peace exactly, something deeper, a wholeness I had thought I would never know again. But life has a way of testing the fragile things we build. And just when I thought we had reached jagged ground, the past would rise once more. This time in the form of a package that would force Rachel and me to face the hardest truth yet. The package arrived on a rain-soaked morning, left on the porch like an afterthought. The cardboard was damp around the edges, the ink of the return address blurred. Rachel brought it in, setting it carefully on the kitchen table between us. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. When I finally tore the tape open, the smell of old paper and cedar drifted out. Inside was a small wooden box, polished but worn, its brass latch tarnished with age. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Inside were photographs, black and white snapshots of Thomas as a young man, smiling in ways I had almost forgotten. There were letters too, bundled with string, each addressed to me but never mailed. Some were love letters written during our first years of marriage, full of dreams of porches and gardens, of children laughing in the yard. Others were darker, confessions of fear, apologies written but never sent, pages soaked in guilt. At the very bottom lay a single envelope marked "To Helen and Rachel." Rachel's breath caught as I unfolded it. Thomas's handwriting was shaky but legible. The ink faded at the edges. "My girls, if this reaches you, it means I finally found the courage to gather what I could not say face to face. Helen, you bared my anchor when I was too weak to hold steady. I left because I thought I was unworthy of you. That fear turned me into a coward. But not a day passed that I didn't love you. Rachel, I failed you twice. First when I left, and again when I let you believe I was gone for good. I know you may never forgive me, but I pray you'll understand. Every mistake I made was born of fear, not of lack of love. If you can, let the house you've built together be my redemption. Not for me, but for you. Carry on. Love boldly and never let fear steal what love has made. By the time I finished reading, Rachel's tears were spilling freely. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs that came from somewhere deep inside. I reached across the table, taking her hand gently, grounding her in the moment. He saw us, I whispered. Even at the end, he saw us. We sat there for hours, sifting through the photographs and letters, piecing together the man we had both lost and misunderstood. He was flawed, weak, sometimes selfish, but he had loved us fiercely, even when fear made him stumble. And in those letters, he left us something more powerful than regret. He left us choice. That evening, Rose Harbor filled with light and voices. The women gathered for dinner, Patricia telling one of her dry jokes, Linda setting a basket of rolls on the table, the newer residents laughing softly at their own tentative beginnings. Rachel stood at the head of the table, her eyes red, but her smile steady. I want to tell you something, she said, her voice carrying over the clatter of plates. This place was built on pain, but also on love. My father made mistakes that nearly destroyed us, and I made choices that nearly finished the job. But we're still here. We're still building. And this house isn't just ours anymore. It's yours too. The women nodded, some with tears in their eyes, some with quiet smiles. I felt Thomas's words echo through the room, carried on Rachel's voice. Carry on. Love boldly. Later that night, when the house had gone quiet, Rachel and I sat on the porch with the wooden box between us. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and sharp. She leaned back against the swing, her hair damp, her face free of the armor she used to wear like a mask. I think I forgive him, she said softly. Not all at once, but enough to let him rest, and maybe enough to let me live. I squeezed her hand. Forgiveness isn't a finish line. It's a path. We'll walk it together. The porch light flickered gently, moths circling the glow. For the first time in years, I felt peace settle into my bones. Not the fragile kind that shatters at the first storm, but the steady kind that comes from truth finally spoken. We buried the wooden box beside the magnolia tree near Thomas's journal. The soil closed over it, but the legacy within it remained alive, not in paper or photographs, but in the walls of Rose Harbor, in the women who crossed its threshold, in the bond Rachel and I were finally rebuilding. As the last shovel of dirt fell, I whispered, You're home now, Thomas. We all are. The garden grew quiet around us, the night heavy with the scent of magnolia and rain. Rachel slipped her arm through mine, and together we walked back toward the house, glowing warm with light. For the first time, I didn't fear what came next, because whatever storms still waited, we had already proven we could survive them. We had chosen love over fear, truth over silence, and home over exile. And that, I realized, was the real inheritance Thomas had left us, not the pain of his absence, but the courage to keep building, no matter how broken the foundation. If you've walked this journey with me, let it remind you that brokenness is not the end. It can be the beginning of something greater. Share this story, hold on to its truth, and never forget, it is never too late to rebuild, to forgive, to love again.